Hi everyone, welcome to the How She Made It Summit, where we are talking about what it really takes to be a wealthy woman. I am Tiffany Scott, your host. I am the founder of You, Me, She Collective, where I help women connect with their own uniqueness so they can create their in-demand brand. I'm also a community builder where I have created Sister Suppers, so check it out, sistersuppers.com, where we create community from within your home. And today I have the gorgeous, beautiful Heather Allison with us today. Heather and I met, about 6 or 7 months ago in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, Arizona. And she was one of those women that, was just walking, I would say, floating, gliding through the room that I instantly connected with. And I was just like, I want to get to know you better. And she has such a beautiful message. She is a feminine energy and quantum leap coach. And so she uses archetypal activation to help women leave the wounded masculine paradigm and of the fear and struggle that we're so used to, and reclaim the paradigm that was built for success, love, and joy. And so, Heather, thank you so much for saying yes to this interview and just showing up the way that you do. And even though we've been trying to connect before this interview, just being able to see your presence and the way you show up on social media is just always inspiring for me. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey into the work that you do now.
Oh, is the funniest question for me to answer. Because I got cracked open, let's just say about 3 years ago. I really was doing kind of your typical corporate America 9 to 5, still trying to figure out what I was going to do when I grow up. I was bouncing around from or moving from my third failed relationship, like all of the things that just kind of weren't really fitting in my life, weren't really slotting in. And I kind of was just like, why is this feeling so crunchy? Why is it feeling so just off? And this kind of almost right feeling, like it just felt a little uncomfortable. And it was really that I was in this desperate place of what is it that I don't get? What is it that I'm not understanding? Because you do those like middle of the night frantic Googling sessions where you're like, what, tell me, like at 1 a.m. Like there has to be something that I need to know. Well, and the craziest part is I actually think that I found it, because what I found was the seeds that led me into the divine feminine, which I had no idea what that was at the time, which then opened the door into understanding more about the archetypes themselves, which then opened the door into my intuitive and kind of spiritual cracking open, so that now I actually receive information directly about these archetypes, like the quantum energies of them. And so let's just say that like within the course of about a year, my entire world flipped 180, and I went from just trying to figure out what I was supposed to be, marketing and branding and whatever I was doing in the corporate business, project management, to then coming out and saying I'm a coach. And not only am I a coach, I'm a coach around these very kind of esoteric sounding archetypes. And oh, hey, also I talk to people on the other side of the veil, and like that's never been my story. And so it's always hilarious to me to share, because it's not a normal story, but I also think it's very normal, because I think it probably happens to more people than we hear about.
Yeah, thank you. And so I love this story of like going from corporate and then trying to find your why and your purpose and your vision, and then really connecting to this beautiful energy around you. I think you call it your team, right? Mm-hmm. Was there any particular things that you did within that year of transformation that helped you connect to that higher power and that energy source?
Absolutely. It was so crazy, because it wasn't a conscious thing, but I love being able to share this so that if it's something that women are maybe anybody is struggling with, that they can make it more of a conscious thing. I started listening to the nudges. I started listening to those things that, listen, I'd never considered myself very intuitive. I thought that was somebody else's gift. I thought that was not my story. But somewhere in that period, when I was like, I'm just done being so unhappy, like not even unhappy, just not connected with what I knew was possible for me. It felt like, why is this? I know that my life is supposed to be more than this, and it wasn't. And I just found myself feeling the nudges, listening, hearing the nudges, and saying yes in a really big way, to the point where when it came to like, I was starting to scratch the surface of like, okay, what is this divine feminine thing? Like, what is that all about? I'm like, I want to know more. And I want to know more. Like, I want to know all of this stuff because I don't want to have my relationship fail again. And so I literally threw down $5,000 on a coach training program with maybe 20 minutes of thought about it. And that was not an amount of money I played around with like that ever. And I didn't actually even know coaching was an industry. I didn't know it was a thing. I was just like, oh, that's how I can learn all the things, instead of just like taking a class or taking a course. I was like, I just want to know it all. When I then got laid off the day before my training was supposed to start, and I again said a massive yes of like, oh, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. Instead of panicking and trying to find a job, I just went like, okay, I guess this is where we're going. And so it really was a series of these big yeses to things that didn't really make sense to anybody else, including me. And that is, it was kind of that free flow into what I felt like I was being guided to without knowing that that was me being guided. I just was like, this just feels right. And I said yes. And so that would be my invitation to anybody who's kind of feeling that stuckness, is start listening to those little voices and start saying yes in a really big way if you can, even if it's saying yes in a small way for right now. Because my experience is that it yields so much shift and so much magic, and it just starts to accumulate and get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read Michael Singer's The Surrender Experiment.
No.
Basically, so he's the author of The Untethered Soul, which is a New York bestseller. And it's basically his biography, and it's just his whole life story about where he just keeps saying yes. Mm-hmm. Even to the things that his ego wants to say no to, he just shows up and, like you're saying, listens to the nudges and says yes. And it's just like this chain reaction of like things unfolding where he ends up having a multi-million, even maybe billion-dollar company. And this is from a guy that basically lived on the land in a cabin and meditated every day. It's a beautiful story. And you reminded me of that when you were talking about, it's such a easy thing to do, to listen and pay attention and then move in that direction. And we get so disconnected from that. And I think what you're really beautiful at doing is reminding of us that we have the knowledge, the wisdom, the guidance within us. And we also have a whole, like, I love the way that you call it, team around us that we can tap into at any time. So in your journey, particularly over the past 3 years, what would be your definition of creating wealth?
And can I say something really fast before we jump
into
that?
Please.
Just because I want to clarify that, like, it seems like a really easy thing to do, but there's so much conditioning
that's true.
We have as humans, and because we have been in this kind of what I call the wounded masculine paradigm, that's been just a series of choices of the human race to kind of value only masculine energy. And so we've been basically without our feminine in balance for thousands of years. And so it seems like it would be an easy thing, but we're so conditioned to not say yes. And the other thing I really want to like caveat too is it's not just saying yes arbitrarily. It's not, I know there's sometimes people who are like, say yes to everything. Like that's the practice. And I don't believe that's true. It's really deeply saying yes to you and saying yes to the things that you feel are true and you feel as your truth, not just, and not kind of the external prompts and the external shoulds and the external expectations and things like that. I just really wanted to.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think they're both really good points.
Yeah.
It seems easy and it should be easy, and sometimes it can be really easy, but the conditioning that we have makes it harder to really listen into.
Yeah. And so just so you know, if it's like anybody's listening who's feeling like, shit, that's really hard for me, it's not your fault. There's a reason why it's hard for you, because we've all been conditioned into this. So wealth, my definition of wealth, is that what the question was? Okay. Yeah. For me, it's the same energy as abundance, right? It's like and I guess for me, when you boil that down, it's really about, God, what does abundance feel like? It feels like a lot of what feels good, right? A lot of what feels supportive, a lot of what feels in alignment for us. And so it's hard to distinguish for me that those things are any different. Meaning, I think that when we are really, really deeply in alignment, and this is so core of like choosing yourself and saying yes to yourself, when we're really deeply in alignment, my sense is that we experience massive amounts of wealth in all kinds of ways. And that it might not look the way somebody else might define it, and it might not look the way somebody else thinks that we should be experiencing wealth. And it doesn't matter, because again, it all comes back to what is true for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love it all. So with that, I want to go back to, because I think there's a lot of conversation happening right now around the patriarchy and the masculine and the feminine. I know that this is a place where you really play, and you use archetypes to really dive into that and connect with yourself and your inner knowing in the way that who you are. So what do you feel like? Because I feel like the male paradigm or the patriarchy is getting a lot of a bad name right now. And it definitely has had its positives as well. So what are you teaching or you believe in that helps us shift into that place of the masculine, goal-driven, got to achieve, climb the ladder kind of thing, and into that balance of really connecting with your own joy and your wealth and love and the goddess within you as well?
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. I sometimes just launch so fast into this work because I'm so used to talking about it that I forget to talk about the fact that first, we all have masculine and feminine in us. This is not an anti-male idea. It's not a pro-woman. It's not anything to do with gender. We actually all have these energies in us, all of us, in varying balances. But like I said earlier, that humans essentially have been in imbalance and only been functioning in and valuing and upholding the masculine energy within us. And what that's done is, because it's only been the masculine, it's been so out of balance that it's become a wounded masculine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with masculine energy as long as he's balanced with her, right? As long as the masculine and feminine are balanced together. Without it, it's wound. Without the masculine, the feminine would be in wound. So this isn't about just shifting into feminine. This is actually about coming into what I call the divine marriage or divine union. And the difference between these places, so wounded masculine is very much about like, go at all cost. Go because you were told to. Go because that's the template that's been laid out for you. Go because that's just what's expected of you, and that's what you've decided to do, right? It's the idea of, let's just say somebody who signed up for law school when they were, because they felt inspired to, and then they got to their first quarter, got through their first quarter and was like, oh, I actually don't feel in alignment with this, except for in the wounded paradigm, many of us keep going anyway. Well, I started, or I disappoint my parents, or I already paid for this, or I already, whatever those excuses are. Imbalance with the feminine, it's having a very, 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 very deep connection with how things feel, and then choosing to go and act based on that. And so it's when we're only operating in the wounded masculine, it's very much when we find ourselves 10 years down the road going, how the hell did I get here? I thought that wasn't, I thought I chose what I wanted, or this is what I wanted, and it's not, whether it's in merit, in a relationship, or in a career, or in our education, or wherever that is. And in balance, they really are like constantly working together. So we get to feel in the moment what we feel and what we desire, and then take action in service of that.
I love that. That's such a great way to share like you said, the union and the marriage between the two, and the contrast between the two as well. Because I think sometimes we can sway really one way, and we try and course correct, and then we come back all the other way. And it's really finding that balance, because I know that I do, because I've been so used to really striving and thriving and reaching my goals and being accoladed for that, right? Being in my masculine. And so I've had to do a lot of work, and continue to do work around connecting with my feminine and balancing that back into my masculine. And it feels like a dance a lot of the time.
It is. I always say that. That's exactly the terminology I use too. It is. It's this divine dance between the two. And that's exactly when the magic starts happening. And speaking of abundant, like the universe is abundant. Like the universe in and of itself is abundant. It's got infinite resources, right? And where we are right now as a species in general is that we're in these wounded archetypes, and we're kind of like you're talking about, kind of pendulum swinging maybe between the two, or at least functioning in their kind of wounded form, if you will. And when we're in harmony, when they're in the dance, when they're actually in their balance that they're supposed to be in, and what I call the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, we're actually in alignment with the very same energy that exists in the universe. So that's when we get to feel like the universe is at our back. Like that's when because we're in complete and total alignment with literally the abundance of the universe. And so that's when we get to feel like everything kind of happening and moving around us and for us and through us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. That's the feeling of flow, where everything's just like lining up, and the love's coming and the money's coming, and or not even that, the experiences of it, that like people turn up, or you get invited to something, or you get whatever it is, and you're like, but it's what I love about being in the flow is knowing when you're in it as well.
Yeah, and even if it's like not the right people, even if it's the ones that feel really crunchy, or like the experiences that don't feel very good, even those we get to flow through in greater ease and much more, let's just call it like much more wealth of everything, because we know that it's also in our service, and therefore it's so much faster to kind of move through and become what we actually need it to become, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's in those moments of those crunchy times of like, oh, this is really hard, or that person, or whatever it is, when you are being in that place of abundance and wealth, that you can really see it for what it is, the gift that it is. Yeah. So through this interview series, what I've really wanted to do is allow women to open up, share, be vulnerable, and talk about the experiences of creating wealth. And the beautiful thing around this series is we've been talking about wealth, money, spirituality, health, all of it, because it really does encompass all of that. But what I think really helps women, and we were speaking a little bit about this before we jumped on, is really hearing the good, the bad, the not so easy stories of like the journey of, because we're always on the journey of what kind of got us from point A to point B, which you shared about, like you were in this place of like not knowing or searching. And I think so many of us have been there, all going through that, of like, there's got to be something more, something feels amiss, this doesn't feel right, it's okay, but it's not perfect, or it's horrible and I want more, right? And I definitely went through that experience as well. But is there something that you can draw on, like even more recently, that felt uncomfortable, but it was such a beautiful lesson that now you're like, oh, now I really see why I had to go through that to experience what I know now?
Well, it's so funny because my first instinct was just to say, well, like every day, every day, because honestly, like I'm so constantly and consistently in it, meaning not that it's constant struggle, but I am so much at my edge with my cosmic team that I'm constantly receiving more and new, and like going farther and farther and receiving more information and purging and moving again. And like, do you know what I mean? And so, a couple things. Well, let's just so two things. One is kind of an example of this idea of when we're actually connected to what's here in the moment, instead of kind of what we expected to be doing or what we planned to be doing or what have you. And that was that I used to guide this journey, Goddess Army, twice a year. And it was like spring and fall. And last year, I got to be launch time for the fall collective, and I couldn't feel her. I literally couldn't feel the energy of this program at all. And I had a little panic around that, and was like, what do I do? Why is this? What's happening? And and I think a lot of times, and this has been something that my clients have expressed with me, a lot of times I've seen people like, just like, well, launch anyway and just see what happens. And then either it feels really awful, or you don't get the clients that you hope for, or it doesn't fill at all, or it just falls on it. Something happens, or it just doesn't feel good to you. And for me, I took that kind of ebb, that quietness that I couldn't feel anything, to really tap in and go deeper and go, why? What is it that's actually asking me to pay attention here? And what it was that the journey that I guide privately and personally had evolved so much since I first started doing it, that this really had to become just an online course. And that the thing that I offer had to become something completely different. And so it's called Golden Goddess now. And it's just once a year. And so it's less women, much deeper. Like, it's just, it had to evolve. It had to become a completely different entity, if you will. So that's just kind of an example of one of the ways that I kind of like navigate what could feel like a really difficult space, and where I've seen other, like my clients and other people navigate in a really like push through it, force through it, or judge yourself for why it's not happening, or otherwise kind of flounder through it. And it evolved beautifully because I was willing to listen and say, I don't need to do this just because I had planned on it. Right. And then the other is what I shared with you before we hopped on here, which was my very first speaking engagement ever, which is where I met you. And all last year was like dedicated to receiving the message, like what wanted to be shared, because I knew I was going to receive it. I knew it wouldn't be something that I got to decide to share. And it was so freaking uncomfortable, because I literally was a month before the event, and I was like, where is it? What do you want me to talk about? And then it finally started dropping in. But I knew I had to get to the place of like total fucking surrender. And like, I don't get to plan this. I do not get to have all my ducks in a row. I do not get to have this like practiced 18 times and perfected and like nailed so that I get to be up there and totally polished. I don't get to. That wasn't my path. That wasn't my purpose in this experience. My team literally put me in the fire in more ways than one through this process, because I was meant to burn away all this stupid shit that I used to have, which is like totally prepared, have to know exactly what I'm talking about, memorize it front to back, like all the things in perfect working order. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so what you were sharing was that you got up there and everything fell apart, like the technology wasn't working, but the message came through, and you could step into like, okay, that was how it was meant to be. Yeah. Wasn't like I wanted it to be, which happens to us all the time. You go in thinking this is what it needs to be like, and we have a decision of, when it doesn't work out that way, to either accept it and embrace it and see the lessons in the journey in why we had to experience that, or fight against it still even after it's done.
Right. You can open, like what I like to call it's like opening through it instead of like bracing against it. I mean, even the silliest metaphor for that, which is stuntmen or whatever, when they purposely fall or get into like an axe, crash their motorcycle, whatever, they soften their bodies. They don't brace against it, because against it's what causes injury, what causes breakages. It's they actually soften into it so that their body can roll with the impact, if that makes sense. But yeah, everything about my speech got unraveled. Like every logistical guarantee that I was given, that I thought I had got to work within, all the structure I got to work within, all got dismantled that day. And so I was left going, oh my God, how do I actually show up and give this talk? And it didn't go as well as I wanted it to. And I also had women coming up afterwards saying, I totally resonated with that. That was my favorite talk of the morning, and like all these other things. And I was like, okay. And it was probably because I wasn't trying to be perfect, because I knew it wasn't going to happen by that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to just kind of draw on a little bit about, we're talking about very kind of esoteric things, which I love, by the way. How you explained, like, tapping into that voice and going with that voice, or that knowing, or whatever it is for different people. Like sometimes just people feel it, right? On getting to that place of saying yes, that feels in alignment. Before we got on here, you got the download of, okay, this crystal's calling you, it needs to sit with you. What advice would you give to people who are just like, well, I want a team. I don't hear anyone. I want a team around me. How do I connect with my team?
Yeah. Oh man, that's such a lot. There's so much to say about
A
that.
loaded question.
I know, and it's something I actually do teach as well. I have like a little mini course called Cosmic Shaman for the mystics in the making who want that experience to have that team. I'll give you two things first off. The most bare bones is your body. That's the first connection to your intuition that you have. Um, it's not your brain, it's not your head, it's not even your heart. As much as it's a beautiful, beautiful, and like so important, and it's so core of to who we are, your heart also experiences nostalgia and sentimentality and compassion for maybe like, let's just say, not wanting to hurt somebody. I was actually talking to a client of mine about that today, where I had to walk away from a relationship, and then he wanted to come back and work on things that I've been asking for years. And I wanted to heal that for him. I wanted to be that softer place for him, and but it wasn't my truth. Does that make sense? My heart wanted that. My body was like, absolutely not, absolutely not. And so, our bodies are never going to lie. So asking yourself, and always ask one at a time, because if you try to say like, is it this or that in the same question, you're going to get mixed answers. Always ask one at a time. Is it this? Like, should I do this, or should I, and then check, should I do this? And just see what happens in your body. The other thing that I always ask my clients to do, especially when they're kind of wanting to tap in a little bit deeper into their teams, is start paying attention to your dreams. We all have them, and I don't care if you say that you don't, you do. It's just that you've gotten out of the habit of listening, and they've gotten out of the habit of talking because you haven't been listening. And so, doesn't matter, like, go back to the last dream you can remember having and write it down and see what you can learn from that. See what message you might have been given in that dream. That's one way to show like, hey guys, I'm actually ready to start listening. And the other is, if you have a dream, but you can only kind of remember just like the tiniest blip of it in the morning, like I don't know, I'll remember with something about a blue balloon, then write that down. Bringing pen to paper is a really powerful way to bring the mystical into the manifest. Is actually a very feminine energy practice to kind of bring the esoteric into form. So write it down as a way of honoring what you've gotten, and then just see what you can find as far as, or feel into as far as like, what might it be telling you, and take tiniest action in service of what it might be trying to tell you, or the message it might be trying to give you, and let the snowball evolve that way, because it will. You have to, it's all the same channel. You just have to be willing to open it the tiniest bit first, and then continue to engage, continue the dialogue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I knew it was a loaded question, and you answered it
Like, there's so
well. I know that was really beautiful. Thank you. So a couple of questions before we kind of finish up. Who's been an inspiration in your life?
Who? So many people. I actually name dropped somebody to you earlier that I'll name drop again, who was somebody I actually grew up with in high school. And her name's Elisa Romeo. She wrote the book Meet Your Soul. If you haven't read that, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is absolutely a game changer. I did some work with her and read her book before any of this started happening for me, but I credit it with the start of the conversation, meaning I connected to the personification of my soul and actually started a dialogue with her, which then opened the door for so much more. Listen, half the time I thought I was making it up. Mm-hmm. Half the time I totally thought I was making it up. And then eventually someday an actual deeper knowing or a deeper experience of it dropped in. And so start where you are. It's perfect. Let yourself believe. I actually would love to say, and I'll come back to, because I'm sure there's more people I would want to name drop, but a thread to connect here, because I think this is really beautiful to connect back to money and wealth, like actual like money wealth, is the same kind of invitation to believe before it's proven that is going to allow you to open up your intuition, is the same exact energy that's going to allow more money to come to you.
Yeah.
That belief before you have proof is paramount to anything that you want to call in that you don't have here yet.
Yeah. 100%. Mm-hmm. That belief, that knowing, that trust, mm-hmm. all of it, just trusting that it's there and it will come. Yeah. Unwavering faith, and just mm-hmm. calling it in before it's there. It's almost like living in another reality. Like, if you think about wealth as a pot of money that you want, and you're looking at your bank account and it's like negative balance something, and even in that space of like, oh shit, just, you know what, it's coming, it's going to rain down on me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I always like to tell my clients it's very much money reacts really powerfully to the combination of belief and creativity, because creativity holds that energy of play, of non-attachment, of like there's not the energy of like it has to come from this channel, or I don't see it now. And so, do you know what I mean? So see if you can inject some play in there as well, or some creativity. Just like look outside the bounds, look outside of the box that you've been looking in so far.
Yeah, and that's easy to do when you're having fun and you're in joy.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's like being with nature or going for a dance, and that sort of, which leads me to my other question is, what makes you, what brings you joy? Like, if you need to get into a place of like, I just need to get out and do a happy dance and get into a place of feeling joyful, because that breeds wealth. That's manifestation, is being in joy. For me, like it's a certain song, or it's like that dog video. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I feel like everyone's seen it.
No, thank you so much for saying that, because I was sitting here going like, oh, I've got to have something profound for some reason. And I was like, yes, she did. And because like there was a part of me that was like, sometimes maybe it's just a YouTube video. And it's like, so thank you for saying that. I don't think it has to be all that profound, right?
No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. For me, it's so simple. It's okay. So my first instinct, I was like, I really want to say that it's getting out into nature, but the fact of the matter is I live in a concrete jungle, which I'm trying to remedy. And because I desperately need more nature in my life. And that does absolutely bring me joy, when I can get to the beach, or when I can get out and like be surrounded by trees, or that feeling of being in the redwoods, just, and you can smell it, and that joy. But for me right now, it's, I honestly, if I need a dose, I literally get on my mat and I connect to my team, and I in total surrender, because sometimes I have these, what I call human tantrums, and I'm like, why isn't it happening right now? Why that? Right? Like all this stuff. And if I just get on my mat and go, okay, I'm here. What do you want to, what? And I'm such a petulant child. Sometimes I'm like, what do you want to show me? And inevitably, it never fails. I am literally blown, like my brain is blown wide open, and I am in tears suddenly. And I'm so humbled, because they show me how much they're orchestrating for me constantly. And I'm shown, and that is such an opening to joy for me, because you get to remember that you're held. You get to remember that you are so, so perfectly held and loved at all times. And that's like instant, like, right.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's so inspiring. And it was profound, by the way. So I know you have an amazing free gift. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, it's called Embody Your Inner Goddess. And essentially I use that term to speak to the divine feminine, and ultimately to speak to the divine union, because a lot of times when we talk just about feminine and masculine, there can be some trigger in there. Especially, we've been really conditioned to look at the feminine as like weak or submissive or what have you. And so it's called Embody Your Inner Goddess. And it's really this multifaceted experiential gift of Goddess Army, of my online journey. It's my Goddess Manifesto, which is in transmission, which I highly recommend letting yourself feel in your body as you read it. There is an activation. I kind of shared an audio transmission with you so you can feel into these archetypes a bit more. There's actually a sneak peek of Goddess Army in there. There is a workbook, and there is an embodiment practice that I love in there. So it's very like reading you at all levels, at all chakras, essentially, like head and body. And
wow, that's amazing. That's really robust. That's very generous. Thank you for sharing that with us. And just thank you for being you and showing up and being open and honest and sharing your gifts for not only this audience, but in the work that you do as well. I really appreciate you. And I'm so glad that we met.
Me too. I'm so glad. Thank you, love.
Thank you so much.